In December 2023, a young man named Daniel Lee was cleaning out his late grandmother's Victorian house in Boston. He'd recently inherited the property and was sorting through decades of accumulated belongings when he discovered something that would change his life forever: a leather-bound journal hidden inside a wall panel in the attic. The handwriting belonged to his grandmother, but the stories inside were impossible. They detailed family secrets spanning 3 generations, a hidden fortune, and a mystery that would lead Daniel down a rabbit hole he never expected. 3 months after finding that journal, Daniel would find himself standing in an abandoned warehouse in London, facing a man who claimed to have been hunting his family for decades. What happened next would change everything he thought he knew about his identity, his family's legacy, and the dangerous truth his grandmother took to her grave. This is the story of how an ordinary man uncovered the extraordinary truth that his family had been hiding for over a century. Daniel never expected to inherit anything from his grandmother Eliza. They weren't close. She was always distant, elegant, but cold, with secrets behind her eyes that she never shared. Daniel's parents had died in a car accident when he was in college, and grandmother Eliza was the only family he had left, though they only spoke a few times a year. When her lawyer called to inform him that she'd left him her Victorian brownstone in Boston's Beacon Hill, Daniel was shocked. The property was worth millions, money he desperately needed after his tech startup had failed spectacularly the year before, leaving him broke and sleeping on friends' couches. "There's just one condition," the lawyer told him, adjusting his glasses as he slid the paperwork across his polished mahogany desk. The lawyer's voice was crisp and formal as he explained, "You must live in the house for 1 full year before you can sell it." Daniel thought it was just an eccentric old woman's last attempt to control something from beyond the grave. He had no idea it was actually her final attempt to protect him. The house was like stepping into another era: dark wood paneling, antique furniture covered in white sheets, and the lingering scent of her perfume that somehow still clung to the heavy drapes. The first few weeks, Daniel focused on cleaning, organizing, and taking inventory of what he'd need to repair before eventually selling. Then came the day he noticed something odd about the wall paneling in the attic. It was a Tuesday afternoon, unusually warm for March in Boston. Daniel had been up in the attic for hours, sorting through boxes of old photographs and books. His t-shirt was sticking to his back with sweat, and dust motes danced in the beams of sunlight streaming through the small dormer windows. As he was measuring the walls to plan for some renovations, he noticed one panel sounded hollow when he knocked on it. The difference was subtle, just a slightly higher pitch than the surrounding wood, but it was enough to catch his attention. "What I'm about to tell you sounds completely unbelievable," Daniel told his best friend Rachel over the phone that night, his voice dropping to just above a whisper even though he was alone in the house. He continued nervously, "But I swear every word is true." After some careful prying with a crowbar he'd found in the basement, the panel came loose, revealing a small cavity in the wall. Inside was a leather-bound journal, wrapped in silk cloth that had once been vibrant blue but had faded to a dusty periwinkle. Beside it lay a tarnished silver key unlike any he'd seen before, ornate, with a strange symbol etched into its head. The journal was his grandmother's. Daniel recognized her elegant, slanting handwriting immediately. But the contents made no sense. The first entry was dated 1978. "They found us again. I thought changing our names and moving to America would be enough, but the Brotherhood always finds a way. The Lockwood fortune is still hidden where Alexander left it, but they're getting closer. I fear for Margaret and her children. They know nothing of their true heritage or the danger that follows our family. The key must remain hidden until the right time." Daniel stayed up all night reading, the grandfather clock in the hallway chiming each hour as he turned page after yellowed page. According to the journal, his grandmother wasn't born Eliza Bennet at all. Her real name was Elizabeth Lockwood, heir to one of Britain's wealthiest industrial families of the late 19th century. The journal detailed how her grandfather, Alexander Lockwood, had discovered something in 1899 during an expedition in Egypt, something that a group called the Antiquarian Brotherhood would kill to possess. Alexander had hidden both his discovery and the family fortune before he was murdered. His son, Daniel's great-grandfather, fled to America with his young daughter Eliza, changing their names and hiding their past. The most unsettling part? Grandmother Eliza believed the Brotherhood was still active, still searching, and that Daniel's parents' car accident was no accident at all. Daniel felt a chill run through him despite the warmth of the night. Was he reading the delusional ramblings of an old woman, or had he just stumbled into a century-old conspiracy? The next morning, Daniel found the front door unlocked. He was certain he'd locked it the night before. He'd checked twice, a habit formed from years of living in downtown Boston apartments. Nothing seemed to be missing, but something felt off. When he checked the security camera he'd installed earlier that week, he saw it. At 3:17 a.m., a figure in dark clothing had approached his door, stood there for nearly 5 minutes, then left without entering. They were watching the house. That same day, Daniel received an email from an account named Antiquarian_Cipher, with just 4 words: "The key unlocks nothing." His hands trembled as he stared at the screen. He should have called the police. Instead, fueled by equal parts fear and curiosity, Daniel Googled Lockwood family fortune and Antiquarian Brotherhood. The first search yielded nothing useful beyond some old British newspaper archives mentioning the family's mining interests. But the second led him to obscure academic forums discussing secret societies dedicated to obtaining historical artifacts with supposedly mystical properties. One name kept appearing in these discussions: Professor Richard Blackwood of Cambridge University, a historian specializing in Victorian explorers and rumored to have insider knowledge about these societies. Several posts mentioned his controversial papers suggesting that certain private collections contained artifacts of unexplained significance that had been deliberately kept from public view. Daniel booked a flight to London for the following week. If the journal was telling the truth, he needed answers before whoever was watching his house decided to do more than just stand at his door. Before leaving, he photographed every page of the journal and encrypted the files, sending copies to Rachel and his cloud storage. He hid the original journal and key in a safety deposit box at his bank. Whatever was happening, Daniel wasn't taking any chances. What Daniel didn't know then was that his grandmother had left breadcrumbs for him to follow, intentionally. This wasn't just about a fortune. It was about finishing what she couldn't. Cambridge University was exactly as picturesque as you'd imagine. Ancient buildings of honey-colored stone, manicured lawns where students lounged with books, and an overwhelming sense of history pressing in from all sides. Professor Blackwood's office was tucked away in a corner of the history department, filled with books stacked in precarious towers, maps pinned to every available wall space, and artifacts from around the world displayed on cluttered shelves. He was in his 60s, with sharp gray eyes behind round spectacles and an expression that suggested he'd been expecting Daniel long before he knocked on his door. "You're Elizabeth Lockwood's grandson," the professor said immediately. Not a question, a statement. When Daniel asked how he knew, Blackwood smiled sadly. "You have her eyes," Professor Blackwood replied, studying Daniel's face. "And I've been waiting for someone from your family to come looking for answers for a very long time." The professor closed his office door and offered Daniel a chair, clearing a stack of papers to make room for a tea tray that had been sitting untouched on his desk. As he poured, his hands were steady despite his age. "Your grandmother and I corresponded for many years," Professor Blackwood explained, stirring a spoonful of sugar into his cup. "We met in the 1980s when she sought my expertise on Egyptian antiquities. Over the years, I helped her track the movements of the Brotherhood and piece together the clues Alexander Lockwood had left behind." "So the Brotherhood is real?" Daniel asked, the teacup warm against his palms. Professor Blackwood leaned forward, his voice lowering. "Very much so, though not in the way conspiracy theorists imagine," he revealed. "They began as a scholarly organization in the 1800s, dedicated to preserving ancient knowledge. But over time, their mission evolved. Your grandmother was convinced that what Alexander found wasn't just valuable in monetary terms," Professor Blackwood continued, reaching for a worn leather folder from a locked drawer. His voice grew more intense as he explained. "The Brotherhood believes it's an artifact of immense power, a relic they call the Pharaoh's Compass, said to reveal pathways to hidden knowledge." "Do you believe that?" Daniel asked, watching the professor's face carefully. Professor Blackwood paused, choosing his words with obvious care. "What I believe," he finally answered, "is that people will kill for what they believe. And the Brotherhood has killed before." He showed Daniel old newspaper clippings about mysterious deaths connected to Egyptian excavations in the late 1800s, including Alexander Lockwood's accidental fall from a hotel balcony in Cairo. The yellowed paper crinkled beneath Daniel's fingers as he examined a grainy photograph of a man who shared his jawline and eyes, his great-great-grandfather, moments before his death. Your grandmother stopped actively searching years ago, Professor Blackwood continued, but she never stopped watching for signs of the Brotherhood. She believed they had infiltrated powerful institutions across Europe and America. As Daniel was leaving, the professor handed him a small cream-colored envelope, the paper thick and expensive. Eliza left this with me 15 years ago, Professor Blackwood said softly. She said I would know when to give it to the right person. Inside was a torn piece of parchment with what looked like coordinates and a single line of text, where the twin lions faced the rising sun. What am I supposed to do with this? Daniel asked, the parchment light, but somehow weighty in his hand. Professor Blackwood rested his hand briefly on Daniel's shoulder, his expression grave. That's entirely up to you, he warned. But whatever you decide, be careful who you trust. The Brotherhood has eyes everywhere. When Daniel returned to his hotel that evening, he knew immediately something was wrong. The door wasn't forced, but his suitcase had been moved slightly, and his laptop wasn't exactly where he'd left it. Someone had searched his room with professional precision. Nothing was taken. They were looking for something they hadn't found. Daniel checked out immediately and moved to another hotel under a different name, his heart pounding as he paid in cash and gave a false story about a surprise visit to his girlfriend. The coordinates led to a small antiquarian bookshop in East London called Lion's Den Antiquities. Too obvious to be a coincidence. The shop was cramped and dusty, with books piled from floor to ceiling and a faint smell of old paper and tea. The bell above the door jangled as Daniel entered, and an elderly woman looked up from behind the counter where she'd been repairing the binding of an ancient-looking book. Her steel-gray hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and her eyes, sharp and assessing, followed him as he browsed the shelves. I'm looking for something specific, Daniel finally said, approaching the counter. It might have belonged to Alexander Lockwood. At the mention of the name, her expression changed, the wariness replaced by intense focus. Are you family? The elderly shopkeeper asked quietly, her eyes suddenly alert. When Daniel nodded, she moved with surprising quickness for her age, locking the shop door and drawing the blinds. From behind the counter, she retrieved a wooden box inlaid with mother-of-pearl. My name is Marion Chambers, the woman said, her voice steady but urgent. Your grandmother left this here in 1992, said someday either she would return for it, or someone with her eyes would come asking the right questions. Inside the box was an intricately detailed map of what appeared to be an underground structure, with notes in the margins written in a code Daniel didn't recognize. Below the map was a black and white photograph of a young man in Victorian-era clothing standing beside an Egyptian guide at the entrance to what looked like a tomb. That's Alexander, Marion said, a hint of reverence in her tone. My grandfather was his expedition photographer. Marion explained that her family had been keeping Lockwood's secrets for generations. Her grandfather had helped Alexander hide both his discovery and his fortune before the Brotherhood found him. The map leads to a location beneath London, Marion revealed, tracing a finger along the yellowed paper. It's part of an old smugglers' network from the 1700s that was expanded during the Blitz as bomb shelters. That's where Alexander hid everything before he was killed. As Marion was showing Daniel how the map aligned with modern London, her phone rang. The color drained from her face as she listened, her knuckles whitening around the receiver. We need to leave. Now, Marion commanded, already gathering the map and photograph. Someone just broke into my flat, and my security system was triggered. They're closing in. They left through a back door that led to an alley lined with overflowing dumpsters. As they hurried away, Daniel caught a glimpse of a black Audi slowing down at the entrance to the alley. The man in the passenger seat was watching them intently, his face expressionless behind dark sunglasses. Who are they exactly? This Brotherhood? Daniel asked as they rushed toward the underground station, dodging through the early evening crowd. Marion pulled him down the steps as a train arrived, her voice tense with urgency. People who believe power belongs to those willing to take it, she explained grimly. And they've been waiting a century to take this. Marion took Daniel to her brother's empty warehouse in Wapping, a cavernous space near the Thames that had once been used for storing imports from around the world. Steel beams crisscrossed the ceiling high above them, and the concrete floor was stained with decades of use. It was the closest access point to the underground network on the map. "Your timing is either blessed or cursed," Marion said as they examined the map under the harsh fluorescent lights. She looked up at Daniel with a mixture of excitement and concern. "Tomorrow night is the spring equinox, the only time of year when the mechanism Alexander built will align properly." According to Marion, Alexander had created an elaborate locking system that would only work when the sun hit a specific angle, corresponding to important Egyptian astronomical alignments. "We need to be in position by sunrise," she insisted, her finger tapping the map emphatically. That's when they heard the warehouse door open. Marion quickly turned off their light and pulled Daniel behind a stack of wooden crates. Footsteps echoed through the empty space, multiple people moving with purpose. "I know you're here, Mr. Lee. Or should I say Lockwood?" A man's voice called out, his American accent unexpected in this London setting. The voice echoed through the warehouse as he introduced himself. "My name is Daniel Winters. I represent the Antiquarian Brotherhood, and I think it's time we had a conversation that your grandmother avoided having for decades." He continued speaking as his people spread out through the warehouse, his voice projecting confidence and authority. "We don't wish to harm you," Winters announced. "We simply want what belongs to us. Your great-grandfather took something of tremendous importance, something far beyond your understanding." "There's another exit through the office," Marion whispered urgently, tugging at Daniel's sleeve. "We need to move while they're still searching the main floor." As they crept toward the back office, Daniel's elbow knocked over a metal rod leaning against the crates. The clang echoed through the warehouse like a gunshot. "Run!" Marion shouted, already pushing Daniel toward the exit. They sprinted for the office door as footsteps pounded behind them. Daniel made it through first, turning to wait for Marion, just in time to see her stumble and fall, her ankle twisting beneath her. Before he could go back for her, a man in a dark suit grabbed her arm. Two others were closing in fast. "Go!" Marion shouted at Daniel, her eyes fierce with determination despite her capture. She gestured frantically toward the warehouse interior. "The entrance is beneath the third support column. Find it before they do." Daniel hesitated for only a second before closing and locking the office door. There was a metal exit door on the far side of the room. Behind him, he could hear them breaking through the office door, wood splintering. He burst out into the cool night air and ran without looking back, the silver key clutched in his palm so tightly that it left an impression on his skin. Using the access point Marion had identified, Daniel made his way into the forgotten tunnels beneath London. The air was damp and stale, the only light coming from his phone's flashlight. Water dripped somewhere in the distance, and his footsteps echoed against brick walls that had stood for centuries. He followed the map through a maze of tunnels, some areas partially collapsed, others reinforced with newer materials. After what felt like hours, Daniel reached a chamber that matched the central area on the map. It was a circular room with a domed ceiling, empty except for what appeared to be a stone pedestal in the center. The walls were inscribed with hieroglyphics and strange symbols that seemed to be a mixture of Egyptian and something else entirely. The pedestal had an indentation that matched the shape of the silver key. As Daniel approached the pedestal, he heard footsteps behind him. He whirled around to find Daniel Winters standing at the entrance to the chamber, alone. He was younger than Daniel had expected, perhaps in his late 30s, with dark hair going silver at the temples and the confident posture of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Impressive," Winters said, his voice echoing in the chamber. He stepped into the dim light, his expression a mixture of admiration and calculation. "Your grandmother never got this far. She was more concerned with hiding than seeking." "What happened to Marion?" Daniel demanded, his voice steadier than he felt. Winters spread his hands in a placating gesture. "She's unharmed," he assured Daniel. "Unlike your family, the Brotherhood doesn't resort to violence unless absolutely necessary. Like with my parents? Or Alexander Lockwood?" Daniel shot back, anger rising in his voice. A flicker of something, regret, crossed Winters' face. "The past actions of the Brotherhood were sometimes zealous," he admitted quietly. "But that was before my time." He stepped further into the chamber, his expensive shoes sending small pebbles skittering across the floor. "You don't understand what's at stake," Winters continued, his voice growing more passionate. "What Alexander found isn't just a treasure. It's knowledge that could change humanity's understanding of our own history." "And you think that belongs to your secret club?" Daniel asked defiantly. Winters shook his head slowly. "I think it belongs to everyone," he clarified, "but needs to be handled carefully by those who understand its significance." Winters held out his hand, his expression intense but not threatening. "The key, please," he requested. "Let's open it together and end this century-old chase." Daniel hesitated, the key warm in his palm. Everything in him screamed not to trust this man, but he was also curious. What exactly had his family been protecting all these years? The first rays of dawn were beginning to filter through small apertures in the domed ceiling, creating patterns of light on the floor that seemed to be moving toward the pedestal. "It's time," Winters said urgently, his eyes fixed on the moving light. He pointed to the ceiling apertures. "The equinox alignment only lasts for moments." Daniel made his decision. He placed the key in the indentation. The pedestal began to rotate slowly as the sunlight hit it, revealing a hidden compartment containing a small bronze device that looked like an ancient astrolabe, along with a leather folder filled with yellowed papers. "The Pharaoh's compass," Winters whispered with awe, his voice barely audible in the chamber. After all this time, what happened next changed everything Daniel thought he knew. As he unfolded the yellowed papers, Daniel realized they weren't mystical at all. They were detailed engineering plans, mathematical formulas, and astronomical calculations far beyond what should have been possible in ancient Egypt. The compass was actually an intricate astronomical device that could predict celestial events with remarkable precision. Alexander Lockwood's journal entries explained his discovery, evidence that ancient Egyptian astronomers had knowledge that wouldn't be rediscovered by modern science for thousands of years, mathematical concepts, astronomical observations, and engineering principles that had been lost to time. Alexander had kept it hidden not because it was magical, but because he understood its historical importance was too great to let it fall into private hands who would keep it from the world. "This belongs in a museum, in universities, studied by everyone," Daniel said to Winters, holding one of the papers up to the light. His voice was firm with conviction. "Not locked away by your brotherhood." To Daniel's surprise, Winters nodded in agreement. "That's what we want too," he revealed, his tone sincere. "The old brotherhood wanted it for power. But some of us, many of us now, want to reform the organization to bring this knowledge to light properly." He handed Daniel his phone, showing him a website for the Lockwood Foundation, a legitimate academic organization dedicated to studying lost ancient knowledge, with respected scholars from around the world on its board. "Your grandmother started communicating with us 3 years before she died," Winters explained, scrolling through emails dated 3 years earlier. "She was helping us transform the Brotherhood from within to create something better. The old guard still exists. They're the ones who've been watching your house, but we're fighting for something different." The last entry in Alexander's papers was a map to the Lockwood fortune, which turned out to be invested in banks across Europe under different names, accumulated interest making it worth over $50 million today. "Your grandmother's final wish," Winters continued, his voice softening with respect, "was for that money to fund the foundation, to continue the work properly, in the light, not in shadows." Today, 6 months later, Daniel speaks from the headquarters of the Lockwood Foundation in London. They've assembled a team of archaeologists, historians, and scientists to study the Pharaoh's compass and Alexander's papers. The knowledge they've already uncovered is rewriting our understanding of ancient astronomy and mathematics. Marion has joined their board of directors, and even Professor Blackwood has come out of retirement to lead their research division. The old brotherhood still exists, operating in shadows, but with each discovery the Foundation publishes openly, their power diminishes. Daniel's grandmother's journal now sits in their museum alongside Alexander's artifacts, no longer hidden behind walls, but displayed for everyone to see and learn from. What separates those who live ordinary lives from those who discover extraordinary truths? Sometimes it's just being brave enough to look behind the walls we've built around ourselves, and to bring what we find into the light, no matter how long it's been hidden in darkness.